Her grandson installed a hidden camera in her bedroom, then called it just smart tech. Ruth Halley, homeowner since 1994, didn't shout. She quietly revoked his access then, rewired the house breaker by breaker. By the time he filed for control, she'd already filed the injunction. He called her paranoid. The court called her lucid. And when he showed up with groceries and a smile, the door code answered, "Access denied." We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The blinking was barely noticeable, a soft red dot, pulsing like a tired breath. Ruth spotted it in the reflection of her bedroom mirror. It wasn't the smoke detector. It wasn't her oxygen meter. It was coming from her bedside lamp. She stood slowly, her hips stiff with the kind of ache that lingered even on good days. She reached up, fingers brushing the shade. The light was off, but warm from earlier. She tilted it gently, peering beneath the pleated edge. There it was, tucked inside the base, small, circular, black glass center. A camera. She didn't gasp, didn't stumble. She only pressed the lamp's switch to be sure it was off, then pulled the shade loose in one motion, silent, deliberate, and stared. There were no wires she could see, no blinking now. Just a single eye, waiting to resume its watching. She covered it with a napkin. Not to hide it, to mark it. Ungoed. Dinner was takeout again. Something microwaved from a tray and smothered in too much pepper. Derek sat at the bar counter, his phone balanced between shoulder and ear, one leg bouncing like he had somewhere better to be. Brielle sat nearby, scrolling her screen, earbuds in but not tuned out. Ruth sat at the table, 3 feet away, her fork quiet on ceramic. On the call, Derek laughed. "She wanders like a dog," he said. "Gotta keep eyes on her. You know how it is." Ruth didn't flinch. She just placed her fork on her napkin, folded it neatly, and stood up. Neither of them looked at her as she left. Oztown. The flashlight from her gardening drawer was weak but steady. Ruth moved through her room like a field medic, eyes sharp, hands calm. She knelt beside each vent, checked behind the baseboards, ran her fingers along power strips and chargers. In the bathroom, the electric toothbrush base blinked when unplugged. In the hallway, the old smoke alarm had been swapped for something smaller. She remembered the swap, vaguely. Derek had insisted. "Smart home upgrade," he'd said. She turned it gently in its socket. Another light. She made a note. Not on paper, in her mind, where it wouldn't be found. Back in her room, she opened her dresser and pulled out the small notepad her husband had once used for auto mileage. She wrote one word. Lamp. Then she slid it under her pillow. Ungoed. Midnight came. Then 2 a.m. The house was quiet, but Ruth wasn't. She sat in her chair by the window, wrapped in the blanket Brielle had given her last Christmas, a cheap polyester thing, soft but synthetic. She didn't turn on any lights, just watched the hallway from behind the curtain. The walls glowed faintly with the flicker of router lights and smart plugs. Everything in this house listened, waited, watched, except her. She saw something move past the kitchen archway, probably the cat or Brielle going for water, and made no sound. Just noted it, catalogued it. This house had been hers once, every socket, every circuit. And now it pulsed with the arrogance of someone who thought ownership was the same as power. Ungoed. By dawn, the hallway lights brightened slightly, pre-programmed to simulate morning. The fridge hummed. The router blinked back to full green. Ruth hadn't slept, but she wasn't tired. She reached for her slippers, stood without needing to lean, and made her way to the kitchen. Derek's shoes were by the door. Brielle's laptop still open on the island. The house wasn't hers anymore, but that didn't mean it wouldn't be again. She opened the cabinet, found the last clean mug, and filled it with water. The red dot on the smart kettle blinked. She unplugged it, then turned slowly and walked back to her room. Not to rest, to plan. Because if they wanted to watch her, they'd better be prepared to learn something. And she was about to teach them what it really meant to own the house. The phone call took less than 2 minutes. "Wes?" Ruth asked, her voice low but clear. The line crackled faintly before a familiar rasp answered. "Still here. Still breathing. What's the job?" "You still do quiet work?" There was a pause. Then, Only for people who ask right. Ruth smiled faintly. Then let's talk about the panel. Us tree. The next morning, Wes pulled into the driveway in a truck that had more rust than paint and an extension cord coiled in the passenger seat like a loyal hound. He didn't knock. Ruth opened the door before his foot hit the porch. They stood, for a moment without greeting. He looked older than she remembered slower on the stairs, more silver in his beard, but his eyes still held the same quiet spark Ben used to admire. You want me to look at the junction box? He asked. I want you to remind it who it belongs to. Wes followed her inside. Ido. The panel in the laundry room was clean but unloved smart meter blinking green, wires bundled in the slick, too-perfect way of modern installations. Derek had upgraded it last spring with a contractor Ruth had never met, but he hadn't changed the name on the meter. Ruth pointed to the serial number near the top. Still mine, she said. Wes nodded. Let's make sure it starts acting like it. Ido. By noon, Naomi had the paperwork drawn. Electrical access revocation. Legal owner retains sole control of all utility functions, maintenance, billing, and infrastructure access. Signatory. Ruth Halley. Effective immediately. I can file it today, Naomi said on speakerphone. He'll never notice until it's already law. Good, Ruth replied. Let him stay busy playing zookeeper. Naomi didn't ask what she meant. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Ruth unplugged the small black cylinder tucked behind the living room cabinet, the Wi-Fi repeater. Its light blinked once, then went dark. Upstairs, Brielle's voice cracked through the ceiling. Why does my stream keep freezing? Ruth didn't answer. She poured herself tea and watched the microwave clock blink 12 o'clock for no one. Later, Mrs. Chow waved from across the street, her yard glove still on, a watering can in one hand. You still let that boy run your house? She called out. Ruth stepped to the edge of the porch. Only until he runs it into the dark. Mrs. Chow laughed once sharp, approving. You let me know when it's time. I've got flashlights. That evening, Ruth walked the house in silence. Every room, every switch. She turned off the hallway nightlights, flipped the master bedroom dimmer down to 0. Even the little light in the coffee maker click. Gone. No timers. No motion sensors. No permission slips to technology. Just her. Manual. Intentional. Hers. Derek didn't come home until late. Brielle's voice floated through the vent above Ruth's room, brittle with complaint. I swear, the router's dying. My stream crashed 4 times, and the thermostat reset again. Ruth pulled the covers up to her collar. Let them talk. Let them troubleshoot. She wasn't resetting anything. She was reclaiming it. At 11:47 p.m., she took the last action of the day. She reached behind the headboard and pulled the lamp cord free from the wall. Then, just to be sure, she unscrewed the bulb. There was no red light this time. Only darkness. Not the kind you fear. The kind you control. The blueprints were in a cracked leather tube in the back corner of the garage, behind the snow shovels and the box labeled Christmas Lights, 2009. Ruth pulled it out with a grunt and laid it across the workbench, dust curling off like smoke. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, but the lines were clear. She unrolled each sheet with slow reverence. There, stamped on the bottom corner of every page in navy ink. Permit owner, Ruth M. Halley. Site owner, 27, Honeywell Avenue, NU. Her name, her house, her wiring. Every wall, every circuit, every breaker drawn, approved, and paid for under her name. Not Derek's, not shared, not inherited. Hers. She ran a finger along the service panel diagram. Then she called Wes. By mid-morning, the back unit had gone dark. Just for a moment. Breaker 1 through 5 are now routed through a private sub-panel, Wes said, wiping his hands. Locked here behind the washer. Only this key opens it. He handed Ruth the small brass key, looped on a plain leather cord. No remote switches, no app control. You're the only one who touches it. Ruth nodded. Good. I've had enough things looking back at me when I flip a switch. Wes smiled, grim. You're rewiring more than the house. That afternoon, Ruth sat at the credit union with her bank book and a quiet determination. She signed the forms without small talk. The manager, a young man with perfect posture, raised his eyebrows only once. You want to close the household utility account entirely? I want to open a new one in my name alone, she said, and move the bills that matter. He didn't ask which bills mattered. He just handed her the new checks. Ido. Naomi called as Ruth left the parking lot. We filed the disconnection clause, she said. Under your ownership and with power of attorney, completely legal. What does he lose? Only everything he didn't earn. Ruth didn't laugh, but her silence had more satisfaction in it than words ever could. Ido. At 4:18 p.m., Brielle texted Derek from the kitchen. The fridge won't stop beeping. The lights keep flickering. Your room's fine. Ours is not. Derek replied from the gym, towel draped across his shoulder. She probably touched something. Brielle typed back. The breaker. Box is locked. Like padlock locked. He stared at the message. Read it again. Then didn't reply. Int Kristen. That night, Ruth poured herself a glass of water and watched the refrigerator light flicker as it tried to compensate for power loss in the front unit. The hum changed less steady, more startled. In the living room, Brielle was on her laptop, muttering, "Why do the plugs keep resetting?" Ruth didn't answer. She just wiped down the countertop, slow and deliberate. Each motion said what her voice didn't. You can't glitch someone who knows where the wires run. Int Kristen. Upstairs, Derek flipped his switch 3 times before realizing his room still worked perfectly. He walked to the hallway, half lit. The other side of the house dimmed and buzzing like a machine, unsure if it had permission to function. Int Kristen. The city inspector arrived in a khaki vest and mirrored sunglasses, clipboard tucked under one arm, name badge swinging on a navy lanyard. S. Waller Electrical and Code Compliance Division. He knocked twice. Not loud, just official. Ruth opened the door with her reading glasses already in hand. You're early, she said. Waller smiled faintly. First appointment on the list. Property flagged for a routine audit. Could be 5 minutes, could be 50. Ruth stepped aside. Take what you need. He raised his eyebrows. You're waiving resident notice? I'm the owner. There's no one else here who matters today. Int Kristen. In the laundry room, Waller squatted by the smart panel. He muttered once under his breath, tapped twice at the digital interface, then paused. Thermostat's feeding duplicate readings, he said. And this line see here? Backlane breaker is pulling current from an unauthorized junction. Looks like a retrofit, but not permitted. He turned. You know about this. Ruth looked him dead in the eye. I've been taking notes. He stood and scribbled. Someone spliced access without a certified pull. Ruth nodded. Then someone shouldn't be here. Int Kristen. Outside, Wes leaned on the fence, arms crossed, watching like it was opening night at a theater he'd helped build. Inspector, huh? He called as Waller stepped outside. Waller gave a clipped nod. Wes squinted at the house, then at Ruth. Smart homes don't like dumb owners. Ruth didn't laugh, but her lips twitched. Brielle's voice echoed from inside. Why is there a neon paper on the door? The answer came in the form of a bright orange sticker slapped just above the doorknob. Notice of pending review, electrical code violation under investigation. Do not tamper. Int Kristen. Brielle's panic came in bursts. First a shriek, then, what the hell is this? Did you call someone? Are we being evicted? Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded. You stream your life for strangers, she said evenly. And you're shocked someone finally tuned in. Brielle huffed. This affects all of us. No, Ruth said. It affects whoever rewired the house without asking permission. That silenced her. For now. Int Kristen. Naomi called the moment the city log updated. He filed no permits for that back-end retrofit, she said. Which means code violation plus liability risk equals grounds for an ownership consolidation motion. Ruth stirred sugar into her tea. How fast can you file? I've already drafted the motion. Just waiting for your go. You've got it. Int Kristen. That evening, Mrs. Chow shuffled across the street in house slippers and a visor. She waved a copy of the community bulletin like a flag. Your name made it into the HOA thread. They're saying your grandson tampered with the submeter. Ruth took the flyer, skimmed it, and handed it back. They're not wrong, Mrs. Chow smirked. He picked the wrong generation to surveil. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sticker on the front door catch the porch light. Want me to leak the story at bridge night? Chow asked. Ruth smiled. Let them wonder how much I know. And Kristen. That night, Derek still hadn't come home. Brielle was pacing in socks, phone pressed to her ear, whispering fast and urgent. Ruth stood in the hallway, arms crossed. She wasn't eavesdropping. She didn't need to. Some stories unravel themselves. The switch flipped like any other, a quiet click behind the sub-panel in the laundry room, but the house felt it like a slap. The front half went still. Not dark, still. The hum of the fridge slowed to a stagger. The smart thermostat blinked 3 times, then shut down. The Ring doorbell made one last chimed breath before collapsing into silence. And in the center of it all, Ruth stood alone, key in hand. Breaker locked. Smile, small and hard. And Kristen. Upstairs, Derek's alarm didn't go off. Downstairs, Brielle screamed. The internet's dead. The router's not even blinking. Ruth stepped into the backyard barefoot, letting the cool stone of the garden path center her. She reached for the mint growing in the clay pot by the hose reel, pinched 2 sprigs. The sun was rising just over the fence line, pale orange, unbothered. She rubbed the leaves between her fingers, inhaled, and smiled. Inside, the power scramble had begun. Why won't it reset? Brielle hissed, jabbing the Ring app. The doorbell's offline. It says unauthorized circuit termination. What does that even mean? Derek had just walked in, gym bag over one shoulder. He looked at the unlit panel by the entryway, then at the flickering LED on the hallway thermostat. She touched something, he said flatly. Brielle snapped. You always say that. By mid-morning, Naomi filed the ejection paperwork. Violation of personal privacy. Unauthorized surveillance of a protected elder. Multiple failures to notify legal owner of electrical modifications, she read aloud. Lease voided. Occupants subject to 14-day vacate. She paused. Want me to attach the footage from the bedroom lamp? No, Ruth said. Not unless they make me show it. Naomi grinned, holding the knife without drawing blood. Classic. That afternoon, Ruth's phone buzzed. Derek. Mobile. She declined. Buzzed again. Derek. Mobile. Blocked. Then, silence. Ruth sat down at her kitchen table with a glass of mint water and her old crossword book. The pencil was sharpened to a fresh point. The down clues were easy. The across even easier. At 6:41 p.m., Brielle rolled her suitcase down the hallway. The lights overhead blinked twice and went dead for good. I didn't sign up for war with a grandma, she muttered as she slammed the front door behind her. Ruth didn't watch her leave. She didn't need to. The house felt different now. Not safer, not yet, but truer. Honest in its silence. Like something real was about to begin. At 9:22 p.m., Naomi's phone lit up. New petition filed. Plaintiff, Derek Halley. Allegation. Ruth Halley exhibiting paranoid behavior, mental instability, and cognitive decline. Naomi didn't gasp. She opened the file. Read it once, then called Ruth. You've been served, she said. Ruth's voice didn't change. He's trying to flip it. He's trying to erase you from the middle of your own story. Ruth stood slowly, walked to the garden window, and touched the mint leaves on the sill. Then he better pray I forget how it ends. The envelope came certified. Not from Derek, of course he wouldn't risk handwriting she could identify, but from his attorney's firm in Henderson. It was thick. Ruth weighed it in her palm before opening it with the same paring knife she used to slice apples. Inside, 4 pages of legal sleaze. Words like paranoid, unstable, cognitively diminished. They wrap themselves around phrases like increased isolation and erratic decision-making. At the top, in bold, was a request for formal evaluation and emergency conservatorship transfer. Ruth didn't blink. She read every word twice, then folded it in half, slid it under her tea mug, and called Naomi. He's going for capacity, Naomi said flatly. I know, Ruth replied. He wants a judge to freeze your legal authority. He's hoping to paint this as elder rebellion instead of elder abuse. And we'll meet him where he's trying to fake concern. Naomi's voice sharpened. You'll need to undergo a cognitive evaluation. Independent. Third party. Fine. Pick your sharpest scalpel. 2 mornings later, Ruth stood at her dining table, laying out the evidence like a woman setting the table for a jury. Bank statements, in order. Medications bottle caps clean. Dosage logs intact. Her calendar, handwritten with routine appointments, meal prep notes, birthdays, and water filters. Her journal, dated, legible, factual. She placed the affidavit from Dr. Sawyer, her primary care physician, for the last 11 years at the very top. The final touch was her monthly bill tracker, color-coded, signed at the bottom. Prepared. Not for defense, for clarity. The evaluator arrived at exactly 10 a.m. A woman in her 50s, blazer pressed sharp enough to cut through pretense. Name tag, Maris Green, Elder Rights Review Panel. She did not smile immediately. Ruth respected that. I understand your grandson's filed a petition, Maris said, sitting at the kitchen table with a tablet. He's filed a lie, Ruth corrected. The woman nodded once. Then, let's get to work. They began with memory. Numbers, phrases, patterns. Ruth answered quickly, then slowed on purpose just once, let the silence hang, then gave the right answer anyway. Maris blinked. You paused. To make sure you saw I don't rush. Fair. Then came logic, financial questions, routine awareness, problem-solving scenarios. What would you do if you couldn't reach your primary contact? Ruth sipped her tea. Use the backup. If they fail, I go to the courthouse with a handwritten letter and wait until someone earns the right to read it. Maris let her pen rest for a second. You practice being underestimated, don't you? Ruth raised an eyebrow. Number, I've just stopped correcting people who need me to be small. After an hour, Maris stood. I won't need to follow up. Because I failed? Maris gave a half smile. Because no one who tracks tea, refills by ounces, and keeps a backup medical directive in 3 formats is mentally compromised. She took her copy of the paperwork. I'll write my report tonight. You'll have it by noon tomorrow. Ruth held the door open. Careful driving, she said. Maris turned back. He's not ready for what you've built, is he? No, Ruth said. But I've stopped building things for him. The report came by 11:46 a.m. the next day. Subject, Ruth M. Halley. Findings, fully lucid, financially competent, logically consistent, no evidence of decline. Addendum, displays signs of boundary defense after prolonged tech-based intrusion and privacy erosion. Naomi filed it with the injunction response before the digital ink was dry. She texted Ruth 2 words. Fortress holds. That night, Ruth sat on the porch with a bowl of blueberries and a pad of crossword clues. The lights inside the house no longer flickered. The sub-panel hummed evenly behind the locked door. The ring was still dead. Across the street, Mrs. Chow gave her a small salute from her window. Ruth raised her spoon. The wind shifted slightly. The house didn't. The will had been folded in a fireproof envelope inside the cedar drawer since before Marla passed. Ruth hadn't looked at it in almost a decade. She opened it slowly now, like unfolding an outdated map she already knew no longer led home. The line naming Derek as her executor was still there. So was the paragraph that passed him the house in its entirety, followed by a list of polite instructions, disguised as legacy. She stared at it a long moment, then took out her pen. No red ink, just black final, clean, irrefutable, a line through his name. And in the margin, 1 word, revoked. Naomi didn't ask questions when Ruth slid the document across her desk. She just flipped to the signature page, nodded once, and pulled up a new file. I'll draft a full amendment, she said, and record the revision before week's end. Ruth tapped the corner of the desk. Not just a revision. I want a replacement, and I want a future in it. Naomi looked up, curious. Name it. Ruth folded her hands. The Halley Quiet Power Fund. Tech scholarships for women who've been watched too closely and taught too little. Naomi smiled. This is going to sting him more than any court notice. That afternoon, Wes arrived with a metal toolbox and a short stepladder. He didn't knock just, let himself in and walked straight to the breaker panel in the front hall. You sure about this? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything I wasn't supposed to be allowed to know. He installed the keypad himself. 6 digits. No app. No override. Just like the vaults at the casino. Wes said, standing back. Difference is, Ruth replied, this one only holds peace. Later, in the dining room, Ruth signed the final generational trust. Naomi read aloud. You retain all life rights to the property. Maggie is named successor, trustee, and primary heir. Irrevocable. Challenge. Proof. Ruth nodded. Add a clause. No future tenants with shared utilities. Ever again. Done, Naomi said, already typing. Ruth placed her palm flat on the table. This house won't be passed down like a weapon. It'll be handed off like a compass. That evening, Ruth walked to the cemetery office with her burial folder in hand. The clerk barely glanced up. I'd like to make a plot adjustment, Ruth said. Separate headstone. Separate lot. Still Hallie. Just not next to Marla and Derek. The clerk blinked. Any particular reason? Ruth didn't hesitate. Legacy should rest beside dignity, not denial. He nodded slowly, checked the available lots, marked her new space in pencil. Mrs. Chow waved from her porch as Ruth returned home. She wore her robe over slacks and house shoes, binoculars hanging from her neck like jewelry. You're still driving the bus, huh? She called. Even when I'm parked. Chow grinned. You still have your hands on the steering wheel. Don't let go. Ruth tilted her head. That's the trick. You don't drop it. You just choose who rides with you. Inside, the old will went into the shredder. The new trust file went into the safe, along with the check Naomi had handed her the first donation into the Quiet Power Fund, already matched by an anonymous donor Naomi hinted might be someone with a Supreme Court clerkship. Ruth didn't care. The future didn't need her name loud. It needed her name clean. That night, Derek sent an email from a new address. Subject line, let's talk, before it's too late. She didn't open it. She just slid it into her digital folder labeled, Unlearned, and below it, typed one sentence in her personal ledger. He was never written out. He wrote himself out. Because at that same moment, Maggie was upstairs sketching a blueprint of the house not as it had been, but as it could be. And this time, it had no rooms for people who mistook inheritance for ownership. The courthouse smelled like old dust and floor polish, the kind of clean that didn't care if you felt welcome. Ruth arrived 5 minutes early. Kane left at home, coat buttoned neatly over a navy blouse. Maggie walked behind her, carrying nothing but a notebook and the quiet steadiness of someone who'd already seen the truth. Naomi stood near the double doors, tapping her pen against her folder. You ready? She asked. Ruth didn't answer. She just walked in. Derek's lawyer was younger than Naomi by 2 decades, and wore a gray suit like it was on loan from a sharper man. His briefcase sat beside him, overstuffed and blinking with nervous tabs. The judge, a woman with steel-framed glasses and a robe that didn't need a gavel to make a point, glanced over her docket and began. Case number 2147, B. Petition for emergency conservatorship against Miss Ruth Hallie. She turned to the petitioner's side. Proceed. Derek's lawyer rose, voice smooth but pitched just above concern. Your Honor, my client has reason to believe his grandmother is deliberately isolating herself from family support, mismanaging shared property, and acting under mental and emotional strain. We are requesting temporary conservatorship until a full evaluation can be ordered. He gestured toward Ruth like she was already an exhibit. Her recent actions suggest paranoia, secrecy, and hostility toward reasonable oversight. Naomi stood slowly, and when she did, the room felt smaller. We object on all grounds, she said, and submit Exhibit A. Ruth Hallie's full estate timeline, Exhibit B. the updated, notarized will, and trust. Exhibit K. certified cognitive capacity evaluation submitted less than a week ago. She stepped forward, placed the folder on the bench. Exhibit D, she added, is her property deed, paid off in 1994. The judge skimmed the top sheet, nodded. Miss Hallie, would you like to say anything before I rule? Ruth rose. No shuffle, no wobble, just the sound of her heels on polished tile. I didn't ask to be protected, she said. I asked to be left alone. She turned her gazanot to the judge but to Derek. He watched me without consent. I watched him misuse my kindness. We're not confused about each other. We're just not pretending anymore. A pause. I may be old, but I am not yours to fix. Oath. The judge leaned back slightly. She didn't blink. Then she said, I see no incompetence, but I do see intrusion. Her gavel tapped once. No theatrics. Petition denied. Mr. Halley is hereby ordered to vacate 27 Honeywell Avenue, NU, within 14 calendar days. No further legal action shall be taken without new evidence. Naomi whispered, That's a shut door with a lock. Ruth didn't smile. She nodded once and sat down. Oath. Outside, Derek was pacing near the stairs, phone to his ear, voice low and clipped. She made it all sound planned, like I was the one trespassing. He didn't see Ruth walk past. Didn't notice Maggie standing a few feet behind, phone in hand, recording nothing, just holding the lens like a mirror. Naomi caught up with Ruth on the sidewalk. Want me to send him a formal cease and desist? Ruth kept walking. Not yet. Why not? Because he's going to try one more thing. They always do. Oath. Back at the house, the door opened to quiet. No lights blinking. No ring notification. No shadows ducking from hallways they never earned. Ruth hung her coat, kicked off her shoes, and poured a glass of mint water. Maggie placed the folded court order on the counter beside her. Do you want me to file it? No, Ruth said. I want to pin it to the fridge, like a report card. Of. That night, a message pinged Naomi's inbox. New request. Filed at 9:03 p.m. Derek Halley versus Ruth Halley. Notice of intent to appeal on technicality. Unfamiliar with trust law clauses. Requires secondary review. Naomi swore under her breath, then picked up the phone. Ruth? I know, Ruth said calmly. Let him try. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out toward the driveway. The porch light stayed off, but she didn't need light to see this far anymore. She just needed the memory of who flipped the switch. Naomi's email came through just after sunrise. Subject: Finalized elder protection. Lockdown order. Attachment: Order No. 327 Halley Ruth. Ruth read it at the kitchen table, glasses low on her nose, mug of mint tea cooling beside the unopened butter dish. She didn't download the PDF. She didn't need to. She just read the preview and whispered, Good. By law, Derek was now banned from the property after the 14-day deadline. No mailbox access, no tool shed excuses, no mailbox overlap, no proximity under any guise of family. Oh, by noon, Wes stood on a stool in the front entry with a level in one hand and a drill in the other. Ruth stood beside him, holding the keypad unit still in its shrink wrap. No app integration? Wes asked. Nope. No remote override? Only mine. He smiled. Now you're speaking my language. He installed two, one for the gate-in, main front door, another for the back laundry entrance. Ruth set the codes herself. 12 digits. Memorized, not written. Inside, the locks clicked in rhythm. Not loud, not proud, just final. End quote. Ruth stood back and admired the sound. This house had learned something, and so had she. End quote. That evening, Wes added motion lights, but only in her section of the house. Ruth's hallway, her back door, her porch. The rest stayed dark. She liked it that way. It's not about visibility, she said, watching him climb down the ladder. It's about choosing what sees me. Wes nodded. You want the light to be yours, not theirs. Exactly. End quote. The next morning, Derek appeared on the porch with 2 paper bags and a carton of oat milk. The air had the false cheer of someone hoping not to be told no. Thought you might need a few things, he said, setting them down on the welcome mat. Groceries. Some things you like. Ruth didn't open the door. She didn't even speak. She let the camera hers now record it. When he left, she opened the screen, pulled the bags inside, and transferred them into the donation crate for the church pantry. Then she taped a note to the inside of the storm door. In thick black marker, it read, You mistook access for love. End quote. 3 hours later, her phone buzzed. Brielle, new number. I told him not to mess with you. He wouldn't listen. Al Sohey still doesn't get it. He thinks this is salvageable. Ruth didn't reply. She let the message sit, unstarred, unread, in the notification shade. Some stories didn't need acknowledgement. They just needed closure. End quote. That night, Naomi stopped by with a bottle of dry cider and a manila envelope. Not for court, she said. Just records. Inside, security footage timestamps, the filed trust with the revised successors, and the digital forensics report confirming the initial surveillance from Derek's devices. Could have gotten him charged, Naomi added. But you said no police. I didn't want him punished, Ruth said. I wanted him blocked. Naomi took a sip of cider. Well, consider him firewalled. End quote. At midnight, the final motion lighting test ran. Only her wing lit up. The rest of the house remained dark, like a theater gone quiet after a performance no one clapped for. She stood in her robe and slippers, facing the hallway where Derek used to walk barefoot with too much entitlement and not enough thanks. Now it stayed dark on command. By hers. The next morning, Naomi called early. I just got a notice from Derek's new attorney, she said. Another appeal? Worse. Naomi hesitated. He's drafting a digital abuse. Complaint claims the trust transition and smart home control prove you're creating a hostile environment, and that you're unstable enough to merit technological oversight. Ruth laughed, once quiet and cold. He's not trying to get back in, she said. He's trying to prove the door should never have belonged to me. Naomi asked, What do you want to do? Ruth looked toward the hallway, where the motion light blinked on, soft and obedient. I want to show him what happens when the house doesn't just say no. She opened her laptop. It says never again. Derek packed like a man on parole slow, sulking, full of silent protest, one cardboard box at a time. No tape, no labels. Just drawers emptied into bags, cables still tangled, resentment still intact. Ruth didn't watch him. She didn't stand in doorways or hover near windows. She just counted the days. 12, then 10, then 7. Each one quieter than the last. End quote. Naomi scheduled the inspection for day 15, mid-morning. Confirm full vacate. Photo record the condition of common areas. Log utility panel access, she said, ticking items off the clipboard. We close this loop airtight. Ruth nodded. And afterward? You change your locks again, Naomi said. Symbolic. Also satisfying. End quote. By the mailbox, Ruth signed the last address change form. Driver's license, voter record, banking all redirected to a P.O. box Naomi set up just off Keystone Avenue. Cleanest break, Naomi had said. No shared inboxes, no old threads. She dropped the envelope in the slot and walked away without looking back. That was the last thread, snipped. End quote. Maggie came by that weekend with paint swatches and iced tea. Mint green, she said, holding up the sample. For the office. Calming but not passive. Ruth dipped a brush into the tray. Subtle, but intentional. They moved the desk first, then laid out plastic drop cloths and opened the windows. Light spilled across the room like water finally going where it was meant to. As the first coat dried, Maggie said, Feels like a reset. Ruth looked at the wall, streaked but steady. It feels like the walls are finally speaking my language. End quote. That night, Derek sent a message. No subject line. Just, you'll regret pushing me out. This was your last chance. Ruth stared at it. Not shocked, not hurt, just verified. She blocked the number with a tap, then opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote, I regret nothing, except teaching him that proximity was the same as belonging. Aware. 3 days left. Derek's boxes sat in the driveway like orphans from a house that no longer knew their names. The fridge hummed again thanks to Wes patching the wiring with Ruth's new sub-panel codes and the Ring doorbell blinked to life under her password. Maggie left a sticky note on the fridge. You reclaimed everything that blinked. What's next? Ruth wrote underneath. Whatever doesn't blink just breathes. Aware. The night before the inspection, Derek walked to the front porch one last time. No bags, no apology. Just a long look at the keypad. He touched it like maybe it would remember him. It didn't. Aware. Inside, Ruth poured herself a glass of water and turned off every light with her own hands. No app, no presets, just fingers that remembered every switch in the dark. And this time, the house remembered her back. The box wasn't hidden. It sat where it always had in the hall closet on the top shelf, behind an old shawl and a ceramic lamp Ruth never liked but couldn't throw away. She had put it there herself almost 20 years ago, when Derek was still small enough to need a step stool to brush his teeth. She took it down slowly, setting it on the kitchen table with care, like a fragile object from a past life. The lid creaked a little when she opened it. Inside were the remnants of belief. There were crayon drawings on folded printer paper, one labeled Me plus Nana plus Treehouse in backwards E's, a glittery birthday card with a scrawled, "Love you lots, Derek," and a crooked sticker of a bear. There was a thank you note he'd written in 3rd grade for a basketball she had saved 2 months to buy. The ink had faded, but not enough to forget. She flipped through them methodically, not to reminisce, but to confirm what was worth letting go. The drawings, the notes, the card, all of it bore a younger version of him, one that hadn't yet grown into entitlement, one that hadn't yet mistaken comfort for leverage. At the bottom of the box was something heavier. She reached for it. A small black device, about the size of a matchbox, sleek, cold, familiar. It was the camera, the one she had pulled from the lamp weeks ago, disconnected now, but still intact. Ruth turned it over once, twice, then set it down on the counter beside the thank you note. She looked at them, both the first gift he ever gave her, and the last. Then she pulled out the fireproof container from under the sink. One by one, she placed everything inside. Not angrily, not sentimentally, just deliberately, like sealing a wound that had already healed. Aware. Behind the shed, the burn barrel sat under the elm tree, its metal blackened from decades of yard waste and dead branches. Wes stood beside it with a bundle of kindling and a box of strike, anywhere matches in his front pocket. He didn't speak when Ruth approached. She handed him the fireproof container. He didn't ask what was inside. She didn't explain. He opened it, emptied it into the barrel. The camera landed with a dull thud atop the papers. Ruth stepped back, arms folded across her chest. Wes struck the match. It flared, hissed, then caught. The kindling flamed up first, then the edges of the thank you note curled inward. The camera didn't melt right away, it resisted. Plastic casing blistering under the heat, glass lens staring up as if still recording, still watching. But it burned eventually. Everything does. Aware. Naomi arrived a few minutes later, stepping around the back fence with a folder under her arm. She stood beside Ruth, not speaking until the barrel had turned quiet flames down to embers, the smoke rising in soft spirals into the late afternoon sky. Naomi looked into the ashes. "It's done," she said. Ruth nodded. "He forgot the first rule of power," she said quietly. "It's granted, not taken." Naomi turned to her, the edges of her voice softer than usual. "You're officially done with him. Legally. Permanently." Ruth didn't smile, but she exhaled. A long, slow breath. The kind that sounded like ownership returning to the lungs it was taken from. Aware. That evening, she returned to the closet where the box had been and placed a folded linen in its place. Just empty space now. No more shelf for the idea of who Derek used to be. Aware. She lit a candle in the kitchen unscented. Plainen left it burning on the windowsill while she brewed a cup of chamomile. The house was still, the kind of still that wasn't silent, but settled. Across the street, Mrs. Chow sat on her porch and raised a glass of iced tea in Ruth's direction. Ruth lifted her own mug in reply. No words exchanged, just understanding. Because some things don't need to be buried. Some things need to be burned. Aware. The event was held in the second-floor ballroom of the old county courthouse, recently converted into a civic hall with soft lighting, mismatched chairs, and a new coat of paint that didn't quite reach the crown molding. Ruth had passed the building 100 times in her life, but had never stepped inside until now. She wore a deep gray blazer with subtle pinstripes and a pair of shoes that didn't pinch. Maggie sat beside her in the front row, knees crossed, fingers laced, her phone off and tucked deep in her purse. Naomi arrived 5 minutes before the ceremony began, wearing a navy dress Ruth hadn't seen before, her usual case folder replaced by a small gift bag. No one in the room knew the full story, but they didn't need to. They only needed to hear what it meant. End quote. The director of the civic committee, a woman with kind eyes and a microphone, clipped to her cardigan spoke Ruth's name with full syllables and no rush. "Tonight, we honor Ruth M. Halley for her contributions to elder tech policy, privacy rights, and advocacy on behalf of digital autonomy for aging communities." The audience applauded. Polite but not performative. Ruth stood slowly. Not out of weakness, but gravity. She walked to the podium without her cane. The microphone was too high. She adjusted it herself. "I've been called paranoid," she began. "Stubborn, isolated, difficult to deal with. And at one point, someone tried to prove I was incapable of knowing my own mind." A few people shifted in their seats. Ruth didn't blink. "But I never forgot where I was," she said. "They just forgot who I was." There was a pause, soft, deliberate, before she continued. "Surveillance disguised as caregiving is not care. Dependency dressed up as generosity is not love. And if we don't name these things clearly, we let them happen to the next person, and the next." She looked out over the crowd faces of all ages, some watching, some quietly nodding. "I'm not here because I want to be remembered," she said. "I'm here because I never should have been erased." Applause began, hesitant at first, then fuller. It started in the center row, then the back, then the whole room. Ruth didn't bow. She stepped away from the podium, calm and upright. Naomi met her at the stairs and hugged her without a word. It was the kind of hug that didn't ask permission. It just understood what had been earned. End quote. The next day, Ruth's op-ed ran in the Sunday issue of the Keystone Journal under the title, "The Cost of Surveillance Posing as Care." She had written every word herself. Maggie helped with formatting, but not phrasing. Ruth insisted on that. She didn't want her voice made prettier. She wanted it printed as it was, sharp, unpolished, specific. By noon, Naomi forwarded the stats. Over 300 messages from seniors across the state. A few from adult children, some from home aides, one from a retired judge. Every one of them said the same thing in different words. "Thank you. I thought I was the only one." End quote. That evening, Ruth and Maggie sat in the backyard, the garden lights casting soft halos across the gravel path. The mint had grown back faster than expected. Maggie had picked a few leaves and tucked them behind her ear. "You're becoming something bigger," she said, not looking up from her sketchpad. "No," Ruth replied gently. "I'm becoming something I should have always been visible." Maggie smiled at that. "You think he's reading any of it?" she asked. Ruth shook her head. "Derek only reads things he thinks he wrote." End quote. The award from the night before sat on the mantel. It was made of recycled glass, etched with her name and the date. Ruth placed it beside a ceramic frog she had once bought at a flea market. Not because they matched, but because neither of them needed to. She wasn't collecting symbols. She was restoring her place. End quote. That night, she opened her email and found a message from a 78-year-old widow in Elkhart who wrote, "I rewired my whole house last month. Told my grandson if he wanted to monitor something, he could start with his own temper." Ruth laughed out loud. She forwarded it to Naomi, then to Maggie, then to herself, because the best kind of legacy isn't built by who you raise. It's built by who you remind they were never invisible to begin with. The grant application site went live just after midnight intentionally. Ruth had asked Naomi to time the launch when most of the world would be asleep, because that's when most of the women who needed it were still awake. It was called the Hallie Signal Grant. Beneath the title was a single line of text, written in Ruth's voice. For women in tech who never had a safe place to plug in. Eligibility didn't require a GPA. It required a story, one that proved not just need, but awareness of the quiet ways surveillance posed as affection, of the small betrayals disguised as help, of what it cost to know how systems worked without ever being invited to build them. By sunrise, there were 17 applications. By the end of the week, there were 86. Ruth read every one. End quote. She chose 2 to begin with. One was a 19-year-old who coded in borrowed time on a school library terminal and lived in a group home outside Tulsa. The other was 32, a former HVAC, apprentice turned sysadmin, who'd slept in her car for 6 months after leaving a partner who tracked her phone activity. Ruth didn't video call. She sent voice messages low, unhurried, deliberate. "I'm not here to rescue you," she said. "I'm here to remind you the wires don't belong to him." The woman in Tulsa responded with a voice shaking, but clear. "No one's ever said that before." The other simply replied, "I didn't know there was a grant that knew how to listen." Ecclesits. Later that month, Ruth added a clause to the trust. Naomi helped her draft it in the study, the afternoon sun warming the table between them. The language was simple but sharp. Upon Ruth M. Halley's death, the property at 27 Honeywell Avenue, NU, shall transition into a non-profit residential tech lab and living mentorship hub for women pursuing technology education without a safe home environment. The words landed like bricks being laid, not heavy, but foundational. Naomi reviewed the final documents, line by line. No loopholes, no fallback heir, no shared claim. This is the kind of clause that makes old men break pencils, Naomi said, capping her pen. Then it's working, Ruth replied. Ecclesits. That evening, Ruth walked through the house, slowly, not out of fatigue, but reverence. She touched the hallway banister, the one Derek used to lean against when he pretended to listen. She paused by the linen closet where the surveillance box had once lived. Empty now. Only fresh towels and a lavender sachet. In the kitchen, she opened the smart switch panel. It was hers now, fully reprogrammed. No back-end override. Naomi had triple-checked the firewall settings. Wes had installed a second breaker for redundancy. She ran her fingers over each switch like it was Braille. Living room, porch, office, bedroom. She clicked them off, one by one. Not out of fear, out of faith. Because Ruth hadn't just removed Derek. She'd removed the gap he had crawled through. The house wouldn't just outlive him, it would outlearn him. Its wiring, once hijacked for control, would now teach others how to prevent the same. Ecclesits. Later that night, Maggie found Ruth at the dining table, sketching something in the margins of a notepad. You redesigning the breaker again? Maggie asked. No, Ruth said, handing it to her. It was a floor plan. Their house, slightly altered. Labels read, East Wing 2 rooms, shared lab central, mentor Sweterior office. Maggie looked up. This is real? As real as the signal you send when you stop hiding. Maggie didn't speak for a while. Then she said softly, He thought he installed a camera to watch you. He did, Ruth replied, smiling faintly. And now, it's going to fund a firewall that watches over everyone else. Ecclesits. As the clock neared midnight, Ruth stood at the front window. She didn't pull back the curtain, just stood behind it, candle burning low, lights still off from her earlier walk. Outside, the porch sat empty. Not quiet out of caution. Quiet because nothing unwelcome would enter again. The house wasn't just protected. It was repurposed. Not as a fortress, but as a signal. Strong, secure, and finally, hers. The email arrived on a Monday afternoon, buried between nonprofit newsletters and a shipping confirmation for a book Ruth had ordered weeks ago. It was from a mutual acquaintance of Naomi-san investor in Palo Alto, who had once considered mentoring Ruth's grandson before the hearings, before the surveillance footage, before the filings. The message was brief, professional. Derek Halley pitched a startup last month, Smart Home Synergy, integration software for elder care homes. Due diligence flagged the 2024 case. We declined. Thought you'd want to know. No apology, no judgment. Just consequence, finally unshackled from the polite silence that so often let men like Derek reset the narrative elsewhere. Ruth didn't forward it. She didn't reply. She reached for her journal, opened it to a clean page, and wrote in ink that didn't fade. Accountability ages better than entitlement. Then she closed the book and moved on. Ecclesits. 2 days later, Maggie stood in the front doorway in a black turtleneck and crisp slacks, her bag slung across one shoulder and a badge clipped to her collar. First day, she said, lifting the lanyard. It read, Halley Signal Initiative, Intern, Systems and Outreach. Ruth stood by the kitchen island, arms folded, eyebrows lifted in approval. You have coffee money? I have Naomi's emergency contact, Maggie said. That's better. They both smiled. Before Maggie left, she pressed her hand against the living room wall, fingers splayed over the paint they'd chosen together weeks earlier. Mint green in daylight, soft moss at dusk. Every woman who walks in that office, she said quietly, is going to feel how this house changed. You'll help make sure they know they can change too, Ruth replied. Maggie nodded, then stepped out the door. Ruth watched her walk down the path, not with worry, but with the kind of clarity that comes when a chapter is no longer being closed, but passed on. O's. That Friday, Naomi arrived late afternoon, a manila envelope under her arm and a familiar knowing in her smile. I finally got a copy, she said, sliding the photo onto the kitchen table. It was from the awards ceremony. Ruth at the podium, face strong, shoulders squared, mouth mid-sentence. Behind her, the crowd blurred. But her presence was sharp, defined, seen. Ruth traced the edge of the photo, not sentimentally, but curiously, as if studying a stranger she might have once forgotten to remember. I don't usually keep pictures of myself, Naomi shrugged. Then make this the first one that doesn't feel like proof, just presence. They didn't frame it right away. Instead, they talked for an hour. About the new mentorship grant proposals, the quiet viral spread of Ruth's op-ed, the way old neighbors now waved with a different kind of respect, not politeness, not pity, but understanding. Before Naomi left, Ruth pulled out a slim black frame and slipped the photo inside. Then she walked over to the wall beside the new smart thermostat, the one she had chosen, the one programmed only with her voice, and hung it with a single nail. Not over the thermostat. Next to it? Because power should never be hidden. But it shouldn't have to explain itself either. O's. That night, Ruth did something she hadn't done in years. She walked through the hallway in bare feet. No flashlight, no checklists, no second guessing. She passed the floor vent by the guest room, the one she used to shine a beam into nightly, convinced the ductwork might be watching her back. She didn't look. She didn't need to. The house breathed with her now, not in protest but in rhythm. The air belonged to her again. It traveled through vents that no longer whispered. It settled around corners that no longer observed. In the quiet just before bed, Ruth reached up to adjust the temperature. The screen flicked on beneath her fingertip, smooth, responsive, warm to the touch. Behind her, the hallway remained dark. Not threatening, just done. And in the reflection of the panel glass, she caught her own face. Clear, upright, unhidden. The house, for once, reflected only her. The morning started like many before it, but without suspicion. Ruth awoke before the sun crested over the tree line, the bedroom quiet in a way that didn't ask to be verified. No standby lights blinked. No silent pings registered from unseen devices. No cords slithered along the baseboards. The silence wasn't sterile. It was earned. She sat up slowly, her slippers all ready where she'd left them lined up square beside the nightstand. In the kitchen, she boiled water, filled the steeping basket with loose chamomile, and let the mug rest on the windowsill to draw flavor under the rising light. There was no hum from hidden drives, no second-guessing which appliance listened, just tea, and a house with no cameras. O's. She opened the kitchen window halfway, felt the breath of early air kiss her cheek, and inhaled. The scent was clean damp stone, old wood, a trace of lavender from the sachet she'd tucked into the heater grate weeks ago. This was what the house smelled like when it wasn't posturing, when it didn't pretend to be something for someone else. This was what home smelled like when it was hers. O's. By late morning, Maggie arrived with a grocery bag looped over one wrist and a grin on her face like something simple had finally clicked. I brought tomatoes, she said, placing the bag on the counter. And the good kind of butter. None of that foil-wrapped sadness. Ruth raised an eyebrow. You planning to make an omelet or file a patent? Can't I do both? They cooked slowly. No rush, no need for plans. They chopped shallots while music played low from Ruth's antique radio jazz, so old it sounded like memory. Maggie manned the skillet while Ruth whisked the eggs, their shoulders bumping occasionally but never colliding. They didn't talk about Derek, or the trust, or the grant applicants. Not because they didn't matter, but because some things didn't require narration once they'd been survived. They ate at the kitchen table with the windows open and their forks clicking gently against ceramic. Outside, the wind stirred the rosemary. Inside, nothing recorded them. O's. After lunch, Maggie rinsed the dishes and left them drying on the rack. Ruth lit a small beeswax candle and set it in the center of the Tableno scent. No label, just flame. They sat without speaking for a minute. Then Ruth said, I'm not angry anymore. Maggie looked up. But I remember. Maggie nodded slowly, then reached out to nudge the candles slightly to center. Ruth smiled. I think that's what peace really is, she added, her voice steady. Not forgetting. Just not needing revenge to feel like safety. O's. The sun dipped behind a line of cottonwood trees, casting soft amber shapes across the tile floor. Shadows stretched gently, no longer a threat. Just the passing of time. Maggie. leaned back in her chair, arms folded, satisfied. Do you ever wish he had said something real at the end? Something that made sense of it? Ruth stirred the last of her tea, then stood to refill the kettle. He said what he meant, she replied. Just not what he thought he meant. She turned toward the hallway, toward the space he had once occupied with so much noise, so much presumption. He put me under a lens, she said softly. I left him in the dark. IFD. They stayed at the table until the candle burned low. Ruth didn't rush to blow it out. She let the wax pool naturally. The wick leaned slightly with age, the glow stretch and then fade. Eventually, Maggie stood, kissed Ruth on the temple, and promised to visit again on Sunday. After she left, Ruth moved through the house the way she always should have been able to without looking over her shoulder. She passed the motion sensors Wes had installed, the smart switch that responded only to her voice, the framed photo beside the thermostat. Each piece held steady, not as defense, but as definition. IFD. She turned out the last light and stood in the kitchen doorway one final time, tea mug in hand, candle wick extinguished, house silent. And in the hush that followed, she whispered not to anyone else but to herself fully and finally, I didn't wander. I left.